Hello, everyone. I'm Paris Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to 12 O'Clock High, a podcast on business leadership with Tom Fox, hosted by Richard Lummis.
This is Tom Fox. Richard Lummis is on assignment this week, so I am visiting with Amy Barnard-Bahn, a well-known compliance and leadership expert, to take a look at 5 of the top leadership failures and scandals from 2019. This special series on 12 O'Clock High is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Thanks so much for listening. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back again with Amy Barnard-Bahn in our 5-part exploration of corporate and leadership failures from 2019. Today, we're going to take up one that had a long tail and may have a long head going forward. It's just not clear at this point. And that, of course, is WellsFargo. So, Amy, first of all, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom.
Amy, I think we have visited on this case for several years now. And but last year saw yet at least more challenges and struggles by the bank, starting off with they could not, first of all, their last CEO was just made some terrible missteps in public that led to his resigning to pursue other opportunities. But they search for a new CEO lasted, I believe, longer than 3 months. So maybe we could start there. Why was this perceived to be the most challenging job in corporate America? And now, having filled that role, if the CEO called you tomorrow and said, Amy, give me 3 things you think I should be doing, what would you tell him?
Okay, Tom, good questions. I'll start with the first one. So why was this one of the toughest jobs to fill in America? Well, because it's a tough job. It took them 6 months actually to fill this job, and they had to sweeten the package to $23 million. So, it was a struggle. The bank needed someone who was willing to take on a serious turnaround while enduring incredible scrutiny from regulators. And as you probably know, they still are under regulatory growth restrictions. And that's just horrible for a bank to be under. In your bank, you want to grow, you want to take in more deposits, you want to make more loans. So banks essentially do 2 things. They loan money and they take in deposits. And so if you have a regulator restricting your growth, that's just not an attractive thing to a banker that wants to grow. So you had to have someone who's willing to take on those things. So, the new CEO, Charles Scharf, is an experienced guy. He has a good pedigree in banking, and he comes from outside the industry, which I think is key. You referred to, Tim Sloan's massive blunders, and he was an internal hire, after John Stumpf. So it raises a really interesting question, Tom, that I know is near and dear to your heart. Was Tim Sloan really too much a part of the old culture to really make it, to really turn around WellsFargo? I think history is going to say probably, no. Based on what happened. WellsFargo had to go outside. They knew that. And actually, when Charles Scharf was proposed in a very rare disclosure from the bank regulating authority, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, they made a statement that they, quote, did not object to Charles Scharf, which is really, their way of expressing appreciation, I think, for having an outsider come in. Because I think the regulators think that, it needs a reboot. And in what could probably be rated as one of the understatements of 2019, Scharf, publicly said, quote, we do have the opportunity to raise the standard. So that's where we are with filling the position. In terms of the top 3 things that I would advise Charles to do if I were his executive coach, I would, number 1, set a new standard of what gets rewarded. I think the biggest thing I see whenever I look at all of the WellsFargo unethical consumer practices, the fake accounts, the unnecessary car insurance, the improper mortgage fees, it all stems from incentives. And they had a compensation policy under John Stumpf. 8 is great, which, he would go around telling people, 8 rhymes with great, and you got paid more if every customer had at least 8 products on their account, and that's how people were paid. And that's problematic. That's not how you put customers first. They really need to go back to their roots. So I would look at what gets rewarded. Second, I would be looking at the team at doing a really thorough analysis on who stays and who goes. I'd really want to know who's salvageable and who's not, both from an optics standpoint, from a perception of ethics standpoint, as well as actual conduct. Because the leaders, he's not going to be able to do this alone. He's got to have a really strong team where they are working absolutely lockstep with the same self-awareness, the same willingness to question, no retaliation, open culture. He's going to have to figure that out. And then the third and most important, after setting the standard, looking at incentives and getting the right team in place, the third is he has to enforce the standard. He has to have total transparency and follow-up. If there are questions, if there are complaints, if there are concerns, they have to be willing to look at those openly and honestly and follow up, and they have to transparently show employees that they are following up and that there's a new culture that's being built here that they can be a part of.
Amy, how would you suggest wearing both your compliance hat and your HR hat? How would you suggest a conversation go around the compensation issue? Most companies tend to put compensation in the HR department, but here you've, I think, absolutely correctly nailed the incentives that the compensation structure drove as one of the leading generators of the problems. How does that conversation, or how should that conversation go between two disciplines who may not discuss that very much?
Great point. They should discuss it. It's a strategic imperative, in my opinion, to get away from the ethics. Many of the ethics problems that we are discussing this week, Tom, stem from not engineering incentives properly. And compliance should be at the table, particularly looking at incentive compensation. It's something I always did in my programs. I was tied at the hip with HR comp and benefits around perks, around sales incentives, particularly because, as you know, those can be the biggest leakage in terms of all kinds of violations. And that's where the greatest variable comp comes in, as opposed to fixed compensation. It's usually in sales. So it should be reviewed. It should be a part of everyone's risk assessment.
Amy, I am probably one of the more vocal people in the compliance community who have said, I am never going to have an account at Wells Fargo. But I don't think you feel that way. And if I were so inclined, or if you were going to try to persuade me otherwise, what would you say to me or someone like me about why I should give Wells Fargo a chance in the future?
I would wait. I wouldn't tell you to go in right away. Good question. I had an account with them when I first moved to California from the East Coast. I would look for signs that they are making the changes they need to make. So I'm cautiously optimistic. And again, I think they're one of the great American companies, founded in the gold rush, have a wonderful history as the Pony Express and delivering mail across the West. And I think there's a certain romance, and I'm probably subject to that, having, adopted the Bay Area as my home now. And, you go into their offices and you see the stagecoaches, and they were built on grit, and they were built on entrepreneurship and helping people, actually, get money into a bank as opposed to put it under their mattress. So I just hope they can turn it around.
And then this scandal, this continuing scandal, is one that has been going on at least 5 years. I'm sure there was a regulatory investigation before that. How do you try to keep your employee base not simply motivated, but moving all in a direction where they're not completely depressed? Where else and what else are we going to hear about?
Yeah, they've had a lot of people in retail leave, which is, consumer facing. They've been a little defensive about that, saying, it's a normal rate, but I don't know. Having worked in banking myself, good retail people you really want to keep them. It's a tough position. And So I would say you'd have to have boots on the ground. You'd have to have really strong leadership, regular meetings. I would really want to be close. I would have a communication strategy and a management by walking around strategy at the top, middle, and bottom up levels to really engage employees, to make sure that they are feeling like you really care again, because clearly this is a culture that for a long time ignored complaints, fired people that were whistleblowers. I mean, it's just astounding. What was it? 5,000 people were terminated.
Right.
It's horrible when you think about it from a culture standpoint, from an HR standpoint, from just a human capital standpoint. There's going to be a lot of rebuilding that needs to be done.
Amy, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time, but I hope our listeners will join us tomorrow for our concluding episode, where we're going to look at the newest corporate scandal on our list, one that literally arose to the public's consciousness in 2019, that being the company Ericsson. Amy, I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Me too.
This is Paris Fox again. We hope you enjoyed this episode of 12 O'Clock High, a podcast on business leadership with Tom Fox. If you enjoyed the show, please go to iTunes and rate the podcast. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the 5-part exploration I'm engaged in with Amy Barnard-Bahn around key leadership and corporate failures from 2019. I hope you will join us tomorrow for our concluding episode, where we take a look at the largest FCPA settlement from 2019, the Swedish company Ericsson.